The alarm hit before I even opened my eyes. A high, cracking whine, the kind that means something outside is trying to kill you right now, not later. I rolled off the cot and hit the floor of the outpost with my shoulder, already reaching for the suit rack before my brain had fully caught up with my body. Red light pulsed across the metal walls. On the small screen by the door, one word blinked over and over: breach. I had 11 seconds of training kicking in before I had 11 seconds of actual thought. Boots first, gloves after. Helmet last, because if I sealed too early I would miss the warning chime that told me exactly where the crack was forming. Outpost Vera was not a large station. It was a single dome, one workshop, one sleeping pod, and one scrubber system that was, on a good day, older than I was. On a bad day, it tried to suffocate me slowly instead of quickly, which somehow felt worse. I grabbed the patch kit and ran. The scrubber room was at the far end of the dome, past the supply shelves, past the cracked window that showed nothing but red dust and a sky the color of a bruise. The whine grew sharper as I got closer, and under it, a hiss. Not a loud hiss. A thin one, the kind that meant a small hole was about to become a large one if I did not reach it in the next few minutes. I found it fast. A seam along the main coolant line had split, right where I had patched it 3 days earlier with a splice that was never meant to hold this long. Vapor curled out of the crack in a pale ribbon, twisting up toward the vents. If that line failed completely, the scrubber would lose pressure, and without the scrubber, the air inside the dome would turn thin and useless within the hour. I dropped to my knees and pulled the sealant gun from my belt. My hands were steady. That surprised me a little, every single time it happened, because my heart was slamming so hard I could feel it in my ears. But hands and heart are different animals. I had learned that a long time ago, out here, alone, with nobody to watch me learn it. The gun hissed as I ran a bead of sealant along the crack. The vapor thinned, then stopped. I held the patch in place with my palm, counting the seconds it needed to cure, watching the pressure gauge climb back toward where it belonged. 90 seconds. 120. The whine of the alarm dropped in pitch, then cut off entirely, and the red light along the walls faded back to a calm, steady white. I sat back on the cold floor and let out a breath I did not know I had been holding. That was the third breach in 11 days. Outpost Vera was not built to last this long without proper maintenance, and proper maintenance meant a full crew, not one technician with a patch kit and a stubborn refusal to call for evacuation. But the relief ship was 3 weeks out. The comm relay had been down for 6 days thanks to solar interference, and the job still needed doing. So I did it. Alone. I was still sitting there, catching my breath, when I heard footsteps behind me. Not human footsteps. Human boots make a certain sound on metal decking, a flat, even sound. These were lighter, quicker, with a strange little drag at the end of each step, like the person walking was testing the floor before trusting it with their full weight. I turned and saw her standing in the doorway. She was tall, taller than me by a full head, with skin the color of a stormy sky, somewhere between gray and blue. 4 eyes sat on her face in a diamond pattern, 2 where a human's eyes would be, 2 higher on her forehead, and all 4 of them were fixed on me with an attention that made the back of my neck prickle. She wore a long coat the color of rust, fastened with clasps that looked like small metal insects, and she carried herself like someone who had never once needed to run from anything in her life. Her name was Vex, 3rd cartographer of the Ithran Reclamation Fleet. She had arrived 4 days earlier in a small scout ship, mapping mineral deposits in the region, and she had been observing my repair work ever since, with the calm, detached curiosity of someone watching an animal build a nest. "That is the 3rd breach this week," she said. Her voice was smooth, almost musical, but flat, in a way that made it hard to read her mood. "3rd one I've caught in time," I said, pushing myself up off the floor. My legs ached. 11 days of running from one failure to the next will do that to a person. There might have been others I didn't catch. That is not comforting. Wasn't meant to be. She stepped further into the room, her eyes drifting slowly over the scrubber housing, the exposed coolant lines, the mess of tools scattered across the floor where I had dropped them in my hurry. She did this a lot, I had noticed. She studied things the way a person studies a puzzle they are not yet sure they want to solve. "You have been awake for how long?" she asked. It was not really a question. It came out more like a diagnosis. "Since the alarm went off." "Before the alarm." I thought about lying, then decided it was not worth the effort. "About 19 hours. The pressure's been dropping slowly for 2 days. I've been watching it. Alone. That's usually how watching works when there's only one person on the station." She did not smile at that. I was not sure her face could make the shape a smile needed. But something shifted behind those 4 eyes. Something that looked almost like concern, if concern was a thing her species felt the same way mine did. I turned back to the scrubber, running a scanner over the fresh patch to check the seal was holding under pressure. It was. Barely. The whole system was being held together by patches on top of patches, and I knew, somewhere in the honest part of my mind, that this could not go on much longer. But 3 weeks was 3 weeks, and someone had to keep the air breathable until the relief ship arrived, and I was the someone who happened to be standing here. "You should rest," Vex said. "I will. Once the pressure's stable for a full cycle." "You said that yesterday." "And the day before that too. I'm consistent, if nothing else." She crossed the room and sat down on an overturned supply crate, the same spot she had claimed for the past 2 days, watching me work with an expression I still could not fully translate. I had gotten used to her presence by now. At first it had unsettled me, the idea of being studied so closely by someone whose entire way of thinking might be built on rules I did not understand. But there was something almost comforting about it too. After 11 days of talking mostly to myself, even silent company felt like company. "On my ship," she said after a while, "no one works like this. Alone, for so long, with failures happening this close together. How do you work then?" "In pairs, always in pairs." She said it simply, the way someone might say the sky is blue, a fact so basic it barely needed explaining. Every Ithran who leaves the main vessel is bonded to a partner before departure. It is not a preference, it is law. "Law," I repeated. "That's a strong word for a work policy." "It is not a policy, it is survival." She tilted her head, and the drag of one of her sleeves against the crate made a soft, papery sound. "A partner is bonded to your biosyn. If your heart stops, or your breathing changes in a way that signals danger, they know instantly, wherever they are on the vessel. They come. Every time, without exception." I paused what I was doing and looked at her properly for the first time since she had walked in. "And if you don't have one? Then you do not leave the ship." She said it flatly, like the idea of doing otherwise had never once crossed her mind. "We stopped sending anyone out unpaired 400 cycles ago. It is considered reckless beyond reason. A person alone is one failure away from simply stopping, with no one aware, no one coming, for however long it takes someone to notice they are gone." I thought about the 6 days of dead comm relay, about how long it would actually take anyone back home to notice if something out here went wrong. Longer than I like to think about. "So how does your species function at all?" she asked, and there it was again, that careful, cataloging tone, like she was filling in a report in her mind as she spoke. "Sending people like you into isolated postings, alone, regularly, with systems this unstable." "We manage," I said, and went back to tightening a valve that did not really need tightening, just to have something to do with my hands while I thought about how to answer her properly. "That is not an answer." I sighed and sat back on my heels. "Look, Vex. Where I'm from, the job still needs doing whether or not someone's holding my hand while I do it. Somebody has to keep places like this running, and usually that somebody is whoever's closest, or whoever's willing, or both. We don't have the luxury of pairing every technician with a partner bonded to their biosyn. We've got people spread across too many places, doing too many jobs, for that to work. So you send them to die." "No." The word came out sharper than I meant it to, and I softened my tone before I continued. "We send them to work. There's a difference. I know the risks out here better than anyone. I chose this posting. Nobody forced me into that seat on the transport ship. And if this scrubber fails completely, while you sleep, unwitnessed, what then?" I did not answer right away. I looked at the coolant line, at the fresh patch still curing under the scanner light, at the small crack in the outer casing that I had noticed 2 days ago, and had not yet had time to properly seal. Then somebody finds out eventually, I said. Maybe not soon enough. But that's the deal I signed up for. It's not because nobody cares what happens to me. It's because the people who send us out here trust that we know how to keep ourselves alive without someone standing over our shoulder every second. Vex was quiet for a long moment. The only sound in the room was the low hum of the scrubber, finally running clean and steady for the first time in days. On Ithran vessels, she said eventually, a solo posting is the harshest discipline we have, worse than exile from the fleet entirely. We consider it a slow execution, simply given a different name to make it sound less cruel than it is. Here it's called a Tuesday. She did not laugh. I was fairly sure Ithran humor did not stretch quite that far, or if it did, I had not yet found the shape of it. But something in her posture shifted, a small loosening around those four unreadable eyes, like she was recalculating something she had taken for granted her entire life. You are the 12th human I have observed in the field, she said. Across 3 different postings, 3 different star systems, none of you had partners. All of you worked exactly like this, separated, unsupported, days, sometimes weeks, from any real help. And what did you make of that? At first I assumed it was a failure of resources, that your species simply lacked the technology to bond crews the way we do. She paused, and her eyes drifted toward the scrubber, toward the neat row of patches I had applied over 11 long days. I no longer believe that. No. She stood from the crate and walked the perimeter of the room slowly, studying the walls, the tools, the small dented cot in the corner where I had barely slept in almost a day. You have the intelligence to build systems like this. You have the discipline to maintain them alone, under pressure that would break most crews I know. What you lack is not capability, it is caution. We've got plenty of caution, I said. We just don't let it stop us from doing what needs doing. That is not caution. That is faith. Maybe it's both. She stopped walking and looked at me directly, all 4 eyes fixed and steady in a way that made the air in the room feel suddenly very still. Explain the difference, she said. Because from where I stand, faith without a partner to answer it is simply a slower way of dying alone, and calling it something noble does not change what it is. I set down my tools and thought about that for longer than I meant to. Outside the small cracked window, the red dust drifted in slow waves across a sky that never seemed to change, day after day, the same bruised color no matter how many hours passed. I had been out here long enough to know every shift in that sky by heart, every small change in the wind, every warning sound the outpost made, before it decided to fail on me again. You're right that nobody's coming to save me if this whole system finally gives out, I said. No partner bonded to my biosyn, no signal racing across the ship to tell someone my heart stopped. If something happens out here, it happens, and I deal with it, or I don't. That sounds like exactly what I described. It's not, though, because the reason nobody's coming isn't because nobody cares what happens to me. It's because the people who trained me, the people who sent me here, they built something into me long before I ever set foot on this outpost. They taught me to notice a problem before it becomes a crisis, to fix a crack before it becomes a breach, to listen to a station the way you'd listen to a person, because it's telling you things all the time if you know how to hear it. Vex tilted her head again, that small papery sound of fabric against the crate as she sat back down. So instead of a partner, she said slowly, working through the idea as she spoke it, you rely on yourself to be early enough, careful enough, awake enough, every single time, with no room for a single mistake. Pretty much. That is an enormous burden for one person to carry alone. It is, I admitted. Some days it's heavier than others. Today was one of the heavy days, but I'd rather carry it myself and know exactly how strong I need to be than lean on somebody who isn't here, who can't be here, and pretend that makes the weight any lighter. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The scrubber hummed steadily behind me, air moving clean and even through the vents, the small dark victory of a system held together by nothing more than patches, stubbornness, and 11 days without proper sleep. I would like to record something, Vex said finally, breaking the silence. For my own understanding, not for any official log. Go ahead. I do not have a framework for a species that sends its own people into isolation, into danger, without the safeguards my own people consider essential to survival. By every measure I know, what you do here should not work. The margins are too thin, the failures too frequent, and yet. She paused, her eyes drifting once more across the neat row of patches along the coolant line, the careful, practiced work of someone who had done this exact task more times than either of us wanted to count. And yet you are still here. Still breathing the same air you fought to keep clean. Still standing, after 11 days that should have broken someone with far more support than you have. We're stubborn, I said. It's not a strategy. It's mostly just spite, if I'm honest. That is not what I observed. No? No. She stood again, smoothing the front of her coat with a small, precise motion. What I observed was someone who has decided, over and over, every single day, to be the reason a disaster does not happen, rather than waiting for someone else to be that reason instead. That is not spite. That is a kind of discipline I did not expect to find in a species that claims to work without support. I did not have a quick answer for that, so I did not try to force one. I just nodded and reached for the scanner again, running one more check along the length of the coolant line to be sure the newest patch was holding steady under full pressure. The reading came back clean. For now, at least, the air in Outpost Vero would keep moving the way it was supposed to. How long until your relief ship arrives? Vex asked. 9 more days, if the schedule holds. And you intend to keep doing this, alone, for 9 more days. That's the plan. She was quiet again, watching me work. And for the first time since she had arrived, the silence between us did not feel like observation. It felt closer to something else. Respect, maybe, though I was not sure her species had a word for that, or if the word meant the same thing it meant to mine. When my scout mission concludes, she said eventually, I am required to file a full report on conditions in this sector. I intend to include a note on human operational methods, specifically on the absence of paired support systems, and the apparent success of individual technicians despite that absence. You planning to recommend we all get partners? I am considering it. A pause. Though I am no longer certain that would improve your outcomes, it may simply change the shape of the burden, rather than remove it. I almost smiled at that, tired as I was. Careful, Vex. Keep talking like that, and people back home are going to think you actually understand us. I do not, she said, and for the first time, there was something almost warm underneath the flatness of her voice. But I am beginning to understand why understanding may not be necessary, only respect. Outside, the dust kept drifting across the bruised sky, the same as it had every day since I arrived, the same as it would for 9 more days until the relief ship finally broke the horizon. Inside, the scrubber hummed on, steady and clean, patched together by nothing more than careful hands, tired eyes, and a stubborn refusal to let the air stop moving. I picked my tools back up, because there was always another line to check, another seam to inspect, another quiet hour of work standing between the outpost and the next alarm. Vex settled back onto her crate, watching, no longer just studying, but something closer to standing guard, even if all she could offer was her presence and her strange, careful silence. It was not a partnership, not the kind bonded to a biosyn, not the kind that would race across a ship the instant my heart skipped a beat. But it was something, and out here, 11 days into a posting that should have broken me twice over, I had learned to be grateful for whatever kept the silence from being total. The scrubber hummed, the air stayed clean, and for 1 more hour, at least, that was enough.